Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pablo Vieira. I am the Global Director of the NDC Partnership Support Unit. I want to welcome you to this exciting conversation. This is part of our Raising Ambition Through Partnership series, hosted by the NDC Partnership. And today's topic is private sector engagement in NDCs. Let me start first with some logistics and housekeeping. We have interpretations for today's session. We are pleased to offer interpretation in Spanish, French for this session. If you would like to listen to the webinar in a language other than the default language, which is English, please follow these instructions in the slide here. At the bottom of your Zoom window, click on the icon that looks like a globe to access interpretation settings. Once you click on the interpretation icon, a pop-up window will appear showing the available languages for interpretation, in this particular case, Spanish and French. Select your preferred language from the list, and then to hear the interpretation clearly, mute the original audio to avoid overlapping sounds. You can do this by clicking the mute original audio option in your bar. So that's the first point. Second, let me give you some more housekeeping. We are asking you to please use the chat function throughout the session to share comments, resources, or engage with other participants, to share questions. We encourage you to introduce yourself and share what organization or country you are joining from. And if you have any questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A function. So we have both chat function and Q&A function. All materials from today's session, including the PowerPoint presentation and highlighted resources, will be shared by email with all of you following the event. And please note that this session will be recorded for future reference and will be shared on the NDC Partnership YouTube channel with all of you who are interested in taking another look. By participating in this session, you consent to being recorded. Thank you for your attention to this housekeeping notes. We are very excited to have you join us today, and we hope you find this session informative and engaging. If you have any further questions, please feel free to ask in the chat. Now, let's get started. As I said, this webinar series highlights successful examples of mitigation and adaptation ambition-raising efforts and emphasizes learnings to scale impacts across the NDC partnership. We've been doing this now for, I think, a year, and it's been a very successful webinar series. Today, specifically, we're going to talk about private sector engagement in the NDC process, and we have three clear objectives for today's conversation. Explore how the NDC partnership can increase private sector engagement support to countries for NDC action. Discuss our new insight brief, including key trends in private sector engagement, requests from countries and partner responses. And finally, identify practical pathways for countries to strengthen their private sector engagement across all stages of NDC action and to mobilize finance for NDCs. As you all know, we're in a critical year where countries are presenting their next round of NDCs, their national determined contribution or climate plans. This is a third iteration of the process. And one of the key elements that we've heard and seen from countries is the importance of advancing the implementation of these NDCs. So this new round of NDCs are NDCs that are high quality, high ambition, but they're also more realistic, implementable, and investable. That means that the private sector, in many cases, has taken a critical role in the development of the NDC and is expected to take an even more critical role in its implementation. So we've had conversations throughout the years with private sector stakeholders. We've worked closely with governments around the world to bring the private sector into the conversation, and there's a lot of lessons learned. And we're going to have today a presentation from our team on the Insight Brief from Guli Sabahi. And then we're going to have a very interesting panel with private sector stakeholders with international organizations about the engagement of private sector in the NDCs. what has been done, what has been successful in driving ambition in NDCs, and what is critical to accelerate implementation and action on the ground through private sector engagement. So with that being said, let me now turn to our opening remarks. It's a pleasure to invite Mr. Hugo Mendes, who is the engagement manager from the Climate Change Secretariat at the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change of Brazil. Brazil also being one of the co-chairs of the NDC Partnership. So it's a pleasure to invite Hugo to open this session today. Hugo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pablo. Well, good morning, colleagues. I hope you can hear me well. On behalf of Brazil's Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, it's an honor to open this conversation on raising ambition through the engagement of the private sector. Developing countries stated that they need something around 2.4 trillion annually by 2030, with at least 1 trillion flowing from private sources. But these aren't just the statistics. They represent the greatest mobilization of capital and innovation in human history. The question is not whether we engage the private sector, but how we transform this challenge into an opportunity. Speaking from Brazil's perspective, we've chosen to see climate ambition and economic prosperity as inseparable partners. We updated our NDC commitments to reducing emissions by 53% below 2005 levels by 2030 and achieving climate neutrality by 2050. But more than targets, we are building a new model of development, scaling up renewable energy, fostering sustainable agriculture, restoring degraded lands, and protecting our forests and biodiversity. But every step requires the innovation, investment, and entrepreneurial spirit that only the private sector can deliver. The Brazilian experience has taught us powerful truths. First, policy certainty unleashes private sector courage and engagement. Brazil's climate change law, our groundbreaking RenovaBio policy, our evolving carbon market initiative, and our country platform, the Brazilian Investment Platform, don't just provide frameworks. They offer investors the confidence to dream big while ensuring our transition leaves no one behind. Second, co-creation from day one yields extraordinary results. As we developed our latest NDC, we are not consulting the private sector as an afterthought after the whole process of preparing the NDC. We invited industries, associations, financial institutions, subnational actors to help to architect the NDC and our future. When mitigation and adaptation measures reflect both ambition and practical opportunity, transformation can happen. As current co-chair of the NDC Partnership, Brazil brings a unique perspective to this mission. We understand the challenges developing countries face because we live them every day, balancing immediate development needs with long-term climate commitments, navigating complex financing landscapes, and building capacity while implementing at scale. This leadership comes with profound responsibility. We must ensure that private sector engagement strategies work not just for developed economies with established financial markets, but for countries building their green economies from the ground up. The solutions we develop together must be scalable, inclusive, and tailored to the diverse realities of developing nations. On the road to COP30, as outlined in the 7th letter of the COP30 president, we view the private sector not only as a participant, but as a beneficiary of climate transition and an indispensable partner in driving its implementation. Companies must therefore assess climate-related risks, adopt credible transition plans, and engage meaningfully with governments and investors on policy financing and delivery. Our COP30 president, Ambassador André Correia do Lago, has underscored in recent meetings with business leaders that active private sector participation is essential to achieve global climate targets, and that COP30 will showcase Brazil and its partners' commitment to sustainability and innovation. Through our mutirão, our collective effort, uniting all sectors of society, we are demonstrating how collaboration between governments, business, and communities can accelerate the shift to a low-carbon economy, turning investments in clean technologies, sustainable infrastructure, and innovative solutions into both climate action and economic opportunity. Colleagues, raising ambition isn't just about tightening targets. It's about accelerating climate action in real-world transformation. The private sector brings the innovation, technology, and finance that can turn our climate commitments into engines of sustainable prosperity, job creation, and natural heritage protection. Brazil stands ready to work with every member of this partnership to advance this magnificent agenda. Together, we can transform NDCs into the foundation of a resilient, low-carbon future that works for our people and our planet. Thank you very much and have a great webinar.
Thank you so much, Hugo, and thank you for those incredible words. Not only by bringing Brazil's great example to the table, all the work that you have done in terms of advancing climate action and your leadership, and how you have thought about the role of the private sector, and how you have engaged the private sector throughout the process of constructing the NDC, of building up a country platform to advance the implementation, and in bringing those voices into the process to advance and accelerate implementation. But also by highlighting the importance of thinking about climate action, not in isolation, but as a driver of sustainable development, as a driver of economic growth, and as a driver of social and economic goals by developing countries. So that is fundamental. We appreciate you being here, and of course, looking forward to COP30 and the important role that non-state actors have in this whole process, as seen through the different letters from the COP presidency and the whole concept of the mutirão, which means we need a strong role from the private sector. So we will hear a lot more about that in our panel, but for now, thank you very much, Hugo. Let us move now to our scene-setting presentation. I would like to invite Guli Sabahi, who's a senior advisor of climate finance at the NDC Partnership Support Unit, and she's going to be presenting on private sector engagement in terms of our insight brief, our work that we have been doing, our conversations that we've been having with countries and with private sector stakeholders and with institutional partners about the role and the engagement of private sector in the process of advancing climate action and specifically advancing NDCs. So Guli, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pablo. Next slide, please. So in terms of the context of the role of the private sector in NDC action, Hugo's comments from Brazil very much underscored the important role that the private sector plays in NDC action. And you have seen different numbers, NCQG numbers. This one is from the Independent High-Level Commission on Expert Group, basically highlighting the importance of the private capital, where approximately 2.4 trillion investment needs per year by 2030 is expected in emerging markets and developing economies, excluding China, with at least $1 trillion expected from private sector, both domestic and international sources. So effective engagement with private sector is critical to any country's NDC action. Private sector, for the purposes of NDC partnerships work, includes both businesses, including small enterprises, as well as multinational corporations. It also includes different types of investors, including financial institutions, which include also institutional investors, commercial banks, as well as blended finance funds, impact investors, foundations, and many others, as well as coalitions and industry associations that represent those different segments of the private sector. Engaging the private sector is a key topic in the partnership's finance strategy. And private sector engagement pathways have been detailed in the recent framework that was developed by NDC Partnership and GCF following extensive consultations with the private sector. Over 100 private sector stakeholders have been consulted, and as well as many of our partners. The framework is called Climate Investment Planning and Mobilization Framework. There is a dedicated website, and we'd be happy to share the link to it in the chat for those of you interested. Earlier this year, we had a thematic partner discussion to further discuss how can the partnership strengthen the private sector engagement support to countries. A group of our partners participated, and the names of those are recognized in the insight brief, and we have a few of them joining today for the discussion, excuse me, including GCF, IFC, and UNDP. Based on that thematic partner discussion, there was an insight brief that was published just a couple of weeks ago, which provides information on the key trends, on country requests on the topic, the partner responses, and some of the recommendations. And I will take you through the key insights from the brief, and also I will then open the floor for the panel discussion on the recommendations. Next slide, please. So between 2017 and 2025, we have received 540 requests on private sector engagement from 77 countries. Next slide, please. Many of those requests remain unsupported, about 40% of those requests. If you look at the nature of the requests, majority of them, over 90% of them, are for technical assistance, which highlights the important role that NDC Partnerships plays on the upstream side, as well as the cross-cutting nature of the requests. We get requests that basically have both mitigation, adaptation, as well as development, nature, and biodiversity aspects to them. Next slide, please. In terms of the types of activities where the private sector engagement requests dominate, number one, engaging stakeholders, bringing in relevant private sector stakeholders at the country level when different NDC processes and conversations take place. Number two, developing capacity of country teams as well as private sector entities on NDCs and related priorities, as well as project and program financing and resource mobilization. And this entails supporting countries on developing their finance strategies or blended finance mechanisms, and really providing guidance on different financing options that could be available for them to attract private sector investors and businesses. Next slide, please. Most of the requests that we receive, and this is common for finance requests in general that we receive, they don't have a specific sector. So these are requests that are across economy. And for the sector-specific requests, energy and agriculture and water dominate. Next slide, please. In terms of the partners that have supported private sector engagement requests, we have identified here the ones based on our NUC database with UNDP, with the government itself also receiving some guidance to be able to implement those requests on their own. World Bank Group, Germany, GGI, FAO, Climate Analytics, UNEP, OASCS, and GIZ, IRENA, and WWF. Next slide, please. So if you had a chance to read the insight brief, you will see that the first part of it deals with the insights that I have just gone through based on our NUC data on country requests and partner responses. But then section 3 of the insight brief sets out the recommendations that came out from the thematic partner discussions and consultations. And we will be discussing those recommendations today with our panelists. So key recommendations that were made focus on the importance of positioning NDCs for investments, the importance of consulting private sector to inform countries' upstream efforts. That's an effort to link, upstream and downstream efforts. Number 3, leveraging partners' varied engagement with different segments of the private sector for the, to align and for greater impact for the benefit of the country's needs and priorities. Number 4, importance of matchmaking those NDC-aligned investment opportunities with the right combination of financing sources and the right segments of the private sector. And the last but not least, continuing strengthening capacity building for private sector engagement, not just among the government, but as well as partner teams, but also private sector teams. And NDC Partnership provides support in all of those areas, and those are highlighted in the Insight Brief, and we will be discussing how the NDC Partnership can better support countries using its delivery mechanisms. Some of those are highlighted here in terms of our role and value add and in-country coordination mechanism, aligning resources and capabilities of partners, enhancing the country capacity, sharing NDC priorities with partners and the private sector to help inform their country programming as well as investment decisions. Then providing information to countries also on partners' offerings. Our partners do very interesting, important work with either helping develop the domestic private sector or mobilize private finance through different financing instruments, and that information can be more readily available for the countries. And number 5, continuing showcasing best practices and countries that are effectively engaging private sector and mobilizing private finance for NDCs. So with that, I will turn back to Pablo to open up our panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Guli. Appreciate your presentation, the insights. It's been long conversations and engagement with partners, with private sector stakeholders, with governments to try to understand where we are. We're seeing an uptake in terms of requests for support associated with finance mobilization, and within those, private sector engagement is becoming more and more relevant. We do have a response rate that aligns with our overall response rate, but there's a lot more that countries need. So it's fundamental for us to come together and provide that support. Of course, we want to see how to bring in the private sector directly into those engagements and move things forward. And that's why we have such an interesting panel with us. We have representation from Julien Taris, who's the senior finance structuring expert from the GCF Private Sector Facility. We have Giselle Saralegui, Global Climate Head at IFC Transaction Advisory. We have Saba Sabani, who's a director at the Istanbul Private Sector Center from UNDP. And we have Andrew Johnston, the CEO of Climate Fund Managers. So as you can see, we have sources of public finance like the GCF that is working hard to leverage private sector finance with the resources that the GCF has. We have representation from finance institutions like the IFC, from international organizations, UN organizations like UNDP, and the representation from the private sector, climate fund managers, to share with us their own experience and what they have been hearing and working on to drive forward climate action. We hope to see also representation from Uganda joining us at some point to also share some thoughts from a country perspective. So let's get started with the conversation. I will be having 2 rounds of questions with our panelists, and what we hope to do is to hear from them on their own experiences and for them to share thoughts in terms of the conclusions from the Insight Brief in terms of the role of the private sector and the recommendations that the Insight Brief has, as presented by Guli, and the role of the partnership in supporting these efforts by countries, by institutions, and by the private sector. So let me start with a question for a UNDP. Saba Sobani, can you tell us how UNDP supports governments in the private sector engagement to inform the development of NDCs? And of course, you have been through the Climate Promise, supporting many countries in close collaboration with the partnership in the lead up to the COP in Brazil. And how are countries enabling strengthening their enabling environments to mobilize private finance for NDCs? So looking both at the preparation of NDCs and the implementation of NDCs. Please, Saba, the floor is yours.
Sure. Just to reiterate, we are the largest implementer of climate action, supporting over 150 countries through the Climate Promise. One of the key areas of these new NDCs around financing aspects. As of September 16, 2025, 34 countries have submitted the NDCs, and all but 2 countries indicated that private sector investment is crucial to their NDCs, only Andorra and Holy See. So we do see the need for policy de-risking, and really on the enabling side. For example, 2 years ago, Côte d'Ivoire was facing with a particular challenge. Their new forest policy had opened up for private management of forested land through concession lands. But in the contracts, there was a clause on ownership carbon credit resulting from the management of these concessions by the private sector. So what we did is to support the country to set up a carbon market framework, a manual that led to the establishment of a carbon market bureau, adoption of regulation that provided clarity for the private sector. So this sort of highlights the importance of climate sort of country platforms. At the other hand, I mean, some of the feedback we received from investors is that, we organized a roundtable of 25 private actors, investors last year, and they said, the NDCs need to really be translated into sectoral investment plans with financial KPIs. It's important to have that. I think that's a bit something that I think with the partnership we need to. And, as it relates to carbon markets, it's quite important to look at long-term offtake agreements. There's an issue of sizing also that matters. So these are some of the areas by which we look forward to working with stakeholders on the call. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Saba, you make, I think, two critical elements. You bring two critical elements here. One is, I think it's very, even though we're early on in terms of the submission of NDCs, as you said, 34, we know from our insights and our collective work that more than 180 countries will submit NDCs. But early analysis is demonstrating how important private sector is. And I think that's a shift from previous NDCs. And I think that's one of those elements that demonstrates better quality of NDCs and how these NDCs are looking more at how to be implementable. But you also raise the critical element that NDCs as a standalone document are not meant to be a tool to mobilize finance at scale. So NDCs need to be translated into investment plans, countries looking at programmatic approaches, for example, understanding what are the different sources of finance, identifying specific elements in terms of finance mechanisms and tools that will allow to bring the private sector to the table, that will allow public funding to be leveraged, both national and international, to bring also the private sector. So I think those are very, very important elements that you're highlighting. And this gives me an opportunity to bring in Julien from the GCF to tell us what does the GCF see as its role in linking domestic SMEs with international capital to accelerate NDC-aligned investments. How can we leverage the GCF funding to bring in the private sector, especially SMEs that are critical in most developing countries to accelerate climate action through NDC-aligned investments? Please, Julien, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pablo. Thanks. First and foremost, I would like to thank you also for this invitation also and this opportunity. You mentioned also it's an exciting discussion. It is also, and we think also it's absolutely critical also. And the theme also of the webinar is absolutely critical. Yeah, you mentioned something absolutely key for everyone. It's clearly also making this linkage also between SMEs and MSMEs also and global capital. For that, it's first of all, I just would like to emphasize that for GCF, or as the largest climate fund in the world, MSMEs are absolutely key. The target is absolutely at the core of our strategy, private sector strategy, but also the overall strategy for GCF for the current programming period, 2024 to 2027. So because first of all, the needs are very are huge for these SMEs also to adapt to climate change, but also to develop climate solutions. And I think we would like to emphasize both are critical. How we do that? First of all, programming. Programming is absolutely key. The first element also is we need to work together. You insisted on that, Pablo. It's absolutely key. Also making this sort of it's a teamwork. Also, it's and it's absolutely key to do so. Why? Because we want to develop investable pipelines for international capital, and this is absolutely key. It's making it emphasizing also opportunities, because climate change is it's also the main challenge of our world, but it's also making that and showcasing that as also an opportunity. How we do that? Clearly, working with countries. Country platform, for example, is a key example. Also, Hugo Mendes mentioned also the initiative led in Brazil. I think it's absolutely, and it's part of the response that we can provide in terms of programming. It's also working with our partners, because we have also a partnership organization, and it's also building, shaping also multi-country program. In some cases, we can also bundle countries maybe in some cases conducive countries, large economies and so on, with also maybe more challenging countries. And by doing that, also we can also create investable pipeline. Rapidly, the second thing also that we do also, it's de-risking. De-risking, it's absolutely key for us also, and as you know, and maybe I would be able also to give maybe more insight, more details about that. But de-risking is clearly something very important to build this pipeline. How we do that? First, through our risk appetite, higher than we try to develop a high risk appetite, and it's a case, for example, if we see our equity exposure, it's a case also with financial instruments. We can also mobilize wide range of financial instruments, grants, for example, with funded also incubators, startups in developing countries, equity, debt. And then through that also, it's providing a sort of comfort also for international capital. I don't want to dwell on that, and happy to answer also any question related to that. But again, also it's the combining programming and de-risking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that we see the evolution of the GCF from being seen as a source of public finance for projects into a machine to leverage private sector finance, because it is very clear now that public finance and the GCF will not be alone capable of mobilizing all the finance that is required to implement NDCs and to transform economies into low carbon resilient economies. So that critical role that the limited public finance that is available and will be available, especially under this geopolitical situation, in bringing in the private sector in an effective way, not through mechanisms like de-risking, but also understanding the need for capacity, especially for SMEs. And I love what you said in terms of looking at this, both in terms of the needs that SMEs have to adapt to be able to be viable over time, but at the same time, as a source of solutions on the ground based on particular realities of countries. And that is critical. And then how to bring in public finance, like the one that you have, to work on things like de-risking, or mechanisms like the ones that you have, like the PPF facilities that help countries move forward their projects. So that's very, very interesting. And it's also a great way to move to our next speaker, Giselle Saralegui from the IFC. Can you share with us which sectors in emerging markets do you see as the most promising for private sector engagement in NDC implementation, and why? And of course, maybe connecting it to the conversation about SMEs, for example, and the tools that are needed to bring them in to effectively engage in advancing climate action. Please, Giselle, the floor is yours. Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Let me share. At IFC, we are working across all sectors to really to drive climate change transition and mobilize and drive private sector investment in finance. And this is really critical. We heard some of the earlier numbers, 2.4 trillion needed annually to reach Paris Agreement NDC goals. Let me share that IFC has worked with financial, in the private sector, has worked with our financial institution partner clients in MAS, which is manufacturing, agribusiness, and services, with infrastructure, and even with venture funds and tech. And I work also in an upstream space where we're working particularly with governments and helping them structure climate smart public-private partnerships. And it's that critical piece upstream that really is such a critical point for engagement and for really translating Paris Agreement NDC goals into viable bankable pipelines to crowd in that private sector investment. And last year, I'm happy to share some of the figures. IFC delivered a record nearly 26 billion of climate finance, both own account and mobilization, across nearly 200 projects. And in the space that I operate, which is that upstream corporate transaction advisory, we also had another record year of 4.7 billion in climate finance. And if we look at the growth over the past 5 years, we've delivered about 11 billion in total and growing. So that's an important catalyst for driving that private sector investment. Again, we work across all sectors, driving the renewable energy transition to also harder to abate sectors in transportation and in utilities such as water, where structure, blending of finance are all critical to create that bankable, viable pipeline. So I think we are really catalyzing finance through also capacity development and upstream support for direct investment across those sectors, which I mentioned. And a critical requisite, I think we heard that earlier, is the enabling environment, the PPP frameworks, and really kind of regulatory policy drill down of what NDCs does. We are helping to set some important precedents, scale, and replication, and I'll just share a few examples here. For example, on the renewable energy front, we are driving that transition, certainly in India. We have driven that, for example, in Uzbekistan with some of our work in PPP solar projects, helping to set important precedents as that country looks to their energy transition. And even in some of our more recent scaling solar 3, mobilizing over 250 million in a 500 megawatt capacity, split over 3 different locations. Those create important precedents that can be built on as well, but not just in renewable energy, but also in some of the harder to abate sectors. So in transportation, for example, we've helped set a really important precedent with the Dakar bus rapid transit system, where we helped to structure with the government a PPP with 100% electric buses. Really important precedent to say we can do it and kind of showcase the impossible as the possible. And then to more standard suburban rails projects that we've done, for example, in Sao Paulo, where we've worked again to kind of extend public transportation, things that have cascaded into positive, raising over 500 million through one of the largest green bond issuances in the Brazilian capital markets as well. And then to some of the harder sectors where bankability, viability really become key issues. For example, in Brazil, in Sabesp, we worked with the government to raise over 3 billion by selling shares of the state-owned water company. And it marked one of the largest stock sales in Latin America in 2024. So again, we're helping to expand clean drinking water and sewage services across 10 million residents, because it is about impact, it is about job growth, it is about economic development and how critical these aspects are. So I think mobilizing that private sector, really critical, but what we've heard very loud and clear from investors and from financial institution partners, aside from ourselves, is that upstream work that we do with governments to structure climate smart, bankable, viable deals and integrate both decarbonization and climate resilience is really critical pathway forward. I can get into more specifics, but let me stop there just to give you a bit of insights of the work that we're doing in that private sector mobilization and working really across sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Giselle, and congratulations. I think it's really encouraging to hear how now the catalytic finance for private sector engagement is growing. And this is an effort that year by year we see more and more coming out of it. I really appreciate your explanation of climate smart PPPs as a critical vehicle to drive private sector, but also understanding that you're working on all sectors, not just the easy ones like energy, but going into the hard sectors to bring in the private sector into the conversation, which we need more examples of that and more innovative vehicles to really bring them into the more difficult sectors and the more difficult countries, which I think is a great way to move to our last speaker for this first round, Andrew Johnston. I know you have been looking closely at how to best engage the private sector in NDCs and looking at opportunities and at countries beyond the usual suspects in terms of sectors and countries. So how can blended finance funds help bring in institutional investors and local businesses to invest in alignment with national NDC priorities? How are you seeing that space, Andrew?
So, hi, Pablo. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks for the question, and great to be here for the afternoon chat. So a couple of themes three themes you put together in respect to this answer. The first is blended finance, the second is commercial investors, and the third is NDCs. Okay, so I want to just take those in the order in which they fall, maybe for the benefit of the participants. Just start off about what blended finance is. So basically it's an interpretation of a structured finance approach to projects. And that means a combination of different types of capital. Now, there are a couple of definitions. The one that we quite like is it's the tactical use of public sector funding to mobilize private sector funding at scale. So there are three components to that: private sector, public sector, and scale. Now, this can be deployed, this technology can be deployed at project level, where many of the people on this call have indeed done that in the past. But increasingly, it's also being deployed at a fund level to aggregate capital around a common mandate to mobilize capital in respect of a specific mandate. So that then brings blended finance into the realm of funds. And why does it make sense for commercial investors to participate? Because blended finance is all about de-risking. And it's all about making an investment which, given various adjustments to its risk profile, would be attractive to commercial investor. Now, what are those things that need to be adjusting? Well, it's all those things that NDCs actually point towards. It's new markets, it's new technologies, it's new business models. There's a lot of new. in this pursuit of, or rather, in deploying capital as a response to climate change and the battle against climate change. It's innovative and that's exciting. It's new, but that's scary. And credit committees and investment committees don't like new stuff. So what blended finance seeks to do is using, and sorry, before I make this final point, and that's really what the NDCs are seeking to do. The NDCs are seeking to give a roadmap to where money needs to go. And the reason why they exist is because money doesn't naturally flow in that direction. So it needs impetus, it needs nuancing, it needs forcing. And the way it does that is through blended finance structures that sort of take those new aspects of the investment thesis and attribute that to participants who are more willing to share the risk associated with that newness. And those are people like philanthropy and donors and DFIs that leave the remaining investment risk available to commercial investors. And therein, you end up with this combination to deploy capital into what has hitherto been difficult to finance sectors. That's sort of the origins of it, Pablo, and we're seeing it getting good traction. We're seeing, I think there are at least a dozen large-scale blended finance initiatives in the market at the moment, which are being presented to an increasing commercial investor base across the region, the US, Asia, and Africa and Europe. And so we at Climate Fund Managers have been doing this for now almost 10 years. We are a private sector manager, and our expertise is in the design and deployment and propagation of blended finance as a model. And so that's how those three things connect and respond to your question. I hope that's been clear.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Yes, very much. And I think that you make a great point in terms of how much of new is needed, how much of innovation is required, but how that also scares investors. And how having a structured way of managing and sharing that risk through funds, for example, really brings ease of mind to investors and will attract that private sector funding, especially for the harder sectors or for the harder countries. And then how having the backing of strong policy frameworks, including NDCs that show the direction of travel of a country, also brings that ease of mind and reduce that risk. So thank you for that, Andrew. I'll come back to all of you, but I just want to remind all our attendees that if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A chat. We will probably have some time at the end of this second round to have your questions being answered by our panelists. I currently see one question for Giselle. So Giselle, you might want to start looking at it because it's coming your way. But anyone else who has questions, please don't hesitate to add them to the Q&A box, and I will make sure that these are answered. So let's move on to the second round. And I'm coming back to you, Saba, from UNDP. What is UNDP's unique added value? And you were explaining the role of UNDP and the climate promise, but more broadly, UNDP as a huge organization with a lot of experience working with countries on development. What is the unique value out of UNDP when it comes to mobilizing private finance for climate action, for NDCs, and how can we work closer together, and how can we use your experience, your expertise through the partnership and the other way around to move forward with more and more requests that are coming from countries to engage the private sector?
So I think, we're not a development finance organization, but we are sort of a big player in this space. As I mentioned to you, I see the policy de-risking is quite critical, but it has to be concrete. I gave the example of, for example, the concessions model of forest and the issue of carbon markets and carbon financing and the clauses that were in terms of ownership, and that resulted in the setup of a government institution, a carbon market bureau, adoption or regulation. I think the second thing is with financial institutions and others, I think the country platform is a very critical sort of enabler. We, for example, with the support of GCF, we've set up supported the Brazilian government to set up BIP, the Brazilian Climate and Ecological Transformation Investment Platforms. It is built on Brazil's leadership in G20 with BNDES and Ministry of Finance. So I think that's a second role. I think the third thing we should really look at is we've really been focusing a lot on digital AI, especially a lot of AI. How do we leverage AI to enable, to build the capacity of government officials? This is something we're doing in terms of training, looking at how to improve their GIS capabilities for forests in Africa through the Central African Forest Initiative, looking at areas, for example, tax fisheries and taxes, how to be able to understand what happens in their territorial water. So these are some of the areas which we have been engaged. We are also supporting institutions of the Green Climate Fund like Pegasus, which is a private equity firm, to look at potential pipelines in places like Morocco, Senegal, and others. So we are also engaged with an ecosystem of private finance actors looking to invest in this space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saba. Julien, when we talk about the GCF, and it's great to hear everyone mention the GCF and as a critical stakeholder in this, how could showcasing successful country-level collaboration with the GCF inspire more private investment for NDCs? We've heard a lot of great examples, not just from the GCF, but across the board from IFC, from Andrew, from UNDP. How can we start using these successful stories on action on the ground, on collaboration, to inspire private sector engagement, private sector investment, and then how can we use the tools of the GCF to drive that forward?
Yeah, thanks, Pablo. It's absolutely key also because more and more we want to highlight also these key examples. And that will be the case, for example, in early October, we will organize our flagship event also, GPIC in Abu Dhabi also. And that will be, an occasion also for us to showcase and to highlight also these examples. And this year particularly, we want to emphasize also concrete examples and maybe a bit balancing also, and if it's, even though it's necessary, but high level discussion also with also this part showcasing examples. To do so, I would like to use an example today because I think it's more useful, than just providing also high level ideas and so on, to emphasize how we want to work and what we did and what we would like to do, more in the future. We'd like to emphasize a project also led by Korea Development Bank that GCF endorsed last year, also in 2024. Project is called Technopreneurship, and it's a project to develop. I mentioned also SMEs and MSMEs as providing solutions, climate solution. It's a case. This project is clearly the case. It's a project in Southeast Asia, in 5 countries: Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Laos, and Cambodia. Why this project is very interesting? Because first of all, this project has been co-designed, with governments, clearly governments. So we've worked a lot, and our partners, KDB, but also clearly GDGI. GDGI has been involved in the design of this project, and we saw also the value add also when you work closely with governments, also because the idea also is that this project has to be fully aligned with national priorities also defined as part of NDCs, and it was absolutely a key element. It's also this project a partnership, public-private, because as I mentioned, it's KDB, Korea Development Bank, GDGI providing also support, technical assistance also, but working closely also with governments, and NH Bank, also Korean bank, also dedicated to agriculture, were through also the different bodies of the bank. So it's providing also, public and private, and also it's clearly a teamwork. It's also gathering also public and private. The project, as I mentioned, also it's developing, companies, startups to provide and so on to develop climate solutions on the ground for, households and also over MSMEs. And the key principle of a project, it's matchmaking local companies also with global tech provider. And we found also that to do that, it's clearly also more efficient. It's clearly leapfrogging, by doing that. But to do so, we need also people on the ground and people able to work also with global tech providers, also coming from global north in some cases. It's a case of the project. I think Giselle and Andrew also mentioned also, and also you, Pablo, also the policy side, and Sabah also mentioned that it's part also of this project, because we know that when you develop also startups and so on, you need also to strengthen policies on the ground. For example, IP is also clearly a key element, a key aspect. We will work on that. This project is about to be launched. I mentioned also the countries. I mentioned that also it's bundling also big economies, large economies, also with also maybe smaller countries. This also is part of what we want to do by associating also different countries. And the final aspect I mentioned, the risking in this project with a risk, and it's related also to Andrew's point about blended finance. It's clearly a blended finance project, providing, and GCF in this case provide also grants to develop incubation, acceleration also for these startups on the ground. But also the risking, because this project will be made up of an equity fund, and this equity fund also we will provide the risking layer also to attract more and to mobilize more capital. I don't want to dwell on that more. Again, I will be able to reply also to any question, but I think this example also, I think showcases the different elements, aspect also that we would like to combine also to create something conducive and something positive, by working with public and private.
Thank you very much, Julien, and thank you also for bringing concrete examples to the table. I think that those real life examples are the ones that we want to showcase and highlight and have as pilots for replication and scaling up. And the term that you use in terms of leapfrogging is critical. With the urgency in hand, we need to leapfrog many of the processes that countries go through in terms of learning how to do things. So this is critical. And thank you again, because I was going to mention, but I forgot Sabah's point in terms of the importance of policy in all of this conversation to drive things forward. So thank you for that. Let me move on once again to Giselle from the IFC. And one critical element that we've been hearing across the board is in terms of collaboration, and how to bring the different voices to the table and to bring the different resources to the table is critical. So how do you see the role of bringing together and collaborating across vertical funds, IFIs, multilateral development organizations, initiatives like the NDC Partnership? How would you bring us all together, UNDP, GCF, IFC, private sector funds, NDC Partnership, to advance this process forward? Because it's clear that there's a lot of virtues and capacities and added values and comparative advantages, but a collaboration is necessary to fill all the gaps and all the voids in terms of what is necessary. So how are you seeing from the IFC that effort of collaborating and bringing successful private investment models across multiple countries through that collaboration?
So look, the collaboration and partnership is critical. We do that certainly with our clients, both private and public. We do that with our partner institutions and well beyond. And I think critical for all of us that are sitting around this table, this virtual table, is working together to advance the Paris Agreement goals. That includes the capacity building with governments. It includes bringing parties, both public and private, together to create that dialogue and understanding as well. I can tell you from an IFC perspective in our transaction advisory, at a level with the governments, we're working to really design and implement public-private partnerships that achieve those national development goals while advancing kind of the sustainable climate-informed development, both across decarbonization and resilience. The work that NDC Partnerships does, that the UNDP, that GCF and others is also very critical to all of these pieces of the puzzle, because if we're going to create those viable bankable pipelines, we all need to work together to build that capacity and deliver at a micro level, a project level from those pipelines. What we're doing really is climate mainstreaming PPPs, and that really starts upstream with governments. And I think I can't emphasize this enough. And we are helping governments incorporate some of that innovative climate mitigation, not for both decarbonization and for resilience, and really enhancing opportunities for investors to access climate finance. So from concession contracts to tenders, we're trying to integrate green building certifications or KPIs that unlock some of the labeled finance markets, green, blue, sustainable linked, that create opportunities to get to a successful financial close. Blending in instruments as well that we've heard from Andrew and others, and really looking to replicate this success story to create that climate smart, bankable, viable pipeline. One thing that I'm also deeply aware, and I want to emphasize here as well, is that what we're seeing around the world is the climate crisis affecting countries, but it doesn't affect them equally or the same. So I think one of the things that we're really looking to do is how do we design well-structured, tailored PPPs that look at climate risk and impact, and that help create that resilience and adaptation, so that in year 2 of operation, you don't have an asset that has been hit by the latest flood and faces operational downtime or asset loss. Really critical, and critical in translating that into some of the partnership work that we're doing with government, with others, to build that capacity around climate risks. And we do that even with our insurers, crowding in tools and looking at that critical question of bankability. So when we structure transactions, we also crowd in the voices of investors and financial institutions to look at how they're reacting to different structures. Really important aspect of that as well. So I think, really to look at private sector engagement to build that participation and that cooperation, we need to see many more well-structured climate smart projects. We're hearing that, and I hear that all the time from the financial institution partners that we work with. We need to have clear project governance structures, both at the national and municipal level. So PPP laws that begin to integrate climate change are absolutely vital as well. Strong government capacity. And I think we need to be mindful that when we talk about government capacity, what some of the opportunities and challenges is to make sure it's not just the Ministry of Environment that may have the Paris Agreement goals front and center, but also make sure that we're building that capacity with the Ministry of Finance or the line ministries like Transport and Energy that may be executing those projects, to make sure that the commitments made at the Paris Agreement level are really translated down through different ministries. The capacity building is there. So I think the adoption of these enabling policies is really going to help strengthen project frameworks. Strengthening project frameworks creates regulatory certainty, and all of this really feeds into creating those investable pipelines as well. So a number of things I could really deepen and broaden, but I think for all of us, the big challenge now is to step up our cooperation, step up action, accelerate also the finance. And that's for project preparation to private capital mobilization. So we all have roles to play, I think, in that important agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giselle, and a very comprehensive answer. And the point that everyone has been bringing to the table are the enablers. And I've been taking notes about the different enablers that have been discussed. And that's, I think, what this conversation is about. How do we bridge that gap between where countries are where the private sector is through those enablers, as you have all been mentioning? But that brings me to Andrew for his second question, which is now looking from the side of private sector, blended finance funds, private sector focused financiers, and the point that GCF brought in terms of strengthening the matchmaking. What role do you see for the rest of us? The IFCs, the UNDPs, the GCFs, the NDC partnerships, to be better, to better bring to you, to funds, to investors, the projects and the programs that can be financed through the private sector.
So, Pablo, thank you. Again, I'm going to try answer this question from two perspectives. The first being the role that the NDCs are playing in making the SDGs real. And what I mean by that is, in an investment environment, certainly in investment funds, our main way that we communicate with the investors is actually through our investment committees. And we have participants in these investment committees who are indeed representatives of private sector institutions that invest in the funds. So the more we can talk about SDGs and NDCs in these forums, the more real it becomes. So now we are like 10 years into the SDGs, and they have become relatively vanilla. What the NDCs enable us to do is actually make these investments relevant from a climate perspective in a place-based context. We can talk about doing an investment in Nigeria and how it correlates and contributes to NDCs, and that then makes sense to investors. We offer through our funds. There's also a dynamic called co-investment. So alongside the funds, you have investors who also invest alongside it. So the investment thesis, the rationale for it, the climate action narrative for it, based and articulated through NDCs, then percolate outside of the fund investment committee into the respective investment committees of the co-investors. So that sort of virtuous cycle of what the NDCs mean and how they are actually applied in the direct investment and credit committees of the funds, plus the ancillary ones of co-investments, starts this sort of cycle of awareness. And I think it's really powerful. So coming more pointedly to your question, what can the partners and what can NDC Partnership do? I think to continue doing what you really do, which is you act as an honest broker between the public and the private. You sit in a very influential position between policy and politics and governments and asset allocators and deployers of capital like ourselves. And so for us to be able to engage with the government on the basis of an alignment of why our investments contribute to the NDCs is not only significant and relevant in terms of our own aggregation of our impact, but importantly, it builds a fundamental alignment between what we are investing in and why that makes sense from a policy and a delivery perspective for the government. And the closer we can bring those together, the stronger this alignment is. And I think that you and this NDC partnership and the members on this call both do a great job in making that connection. It's much more useful to talk to the Minister of Energy around NDCs than around SDGs, because they mean something to him.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And I want to thank all of you for your incredible contributions for this very fruitful and interesting conversation. I will now pass it on to Guli that will facilitate Q&As and before we close this conversation. So Guli, please.
Thank you, Pablo.
have one question right now in the chat from Nigeria to Giselle. Given the growing interest on climate finance, especially through the PPPs, if you could speak, Giselle, about the IFC's engagement in Nigeria. Thank you.
So look, we are engaging globally, and Africa is certainly a priority area for us. We've also set some important benchmarks there that we hope to kind of translate across the continent, and I've shared some of those. One is what we're doing with renewable energy and the Scaling Solar program. Critical because we have a suite of documents that really accelerates action in terms of being able to look at the energy transition. Another first that we did in Senegal was the Dakar BRT that looks at how do we do public transport and how do we decarbonize there. A critical first there with the electric vehicle buses that we set. And we're working throughout the region now in some of the harder to work in sectors like waste management, where we're hoping to do decarbonization with methane abatement. And again, we look at circular economies as well, integrate these different aspects that are so critical. These are models that we can replicate in each and every country. Obviously, the climate resilience aspects are particular to that region. So we will look at climate risk assessments to at a project level, at a country level, to look at how we integrate that adaptation and resilience at a PPP level. Really critical. So just some examples of what we're doing across the continent to engage and to advance the agenda. Happy to also speak offline and to pull you into discussions with some of our regional teams and managers to advance that discussion as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. We'll make that connection. Thank you, Giselle. And while we're waiting for questions from the audience, I don't see any currently. I want to turn back to Sapo. I think he just mentioned in the chat that there was another point that he would like to make. Thank you.
So one concerning trend I'm noticing in the private finance space is that hedge fund managers and others are using climate analytics to short stranded assets or areas where they see high risks for flood. This has happened in California with the utilities and others. I met a couple hedge fund managers who made money because they shorted the stock. And they're like looking around the world for similar kinds of potential disaster sort of profit making. So I think it's quite critical that we enable our developing country governments and private sector and others to understand sort of so this risk-informed financing. This goes back to what Giselle, we have at UNDP. We're working with the Insurance Development Forum and insurers to really have better modeling of risks as you know, at the sovereign level, but also looking at the municipal and other sort of level, so that they are aware of this. And there was a recent study that showed how the cost of capital is going up for all these vulnerable areas and others. So this is quite a critical point, because finance can be both a weapon, it can be something for good, but it can be also used as a mechanism for other sort of things. Thank you very much.
Willie, may I jump in? And Saba, I think you make a really important point, maybe less so about, let me focus a little bit more on the insurance side, which is the adaptation and resilience piece. And I think it's a critical component when we talk about those climate smart and bankable. Absolutely vital that we're able to build in insurance. It's interesting to note that at least in the US, you've got major insurers, State Farm and others, pulling out of certain markets. So I think one of the critical factors that we all need to look at is how are we integrating climate adaptation and resilience into the structuring of these projects. It goes to the heart of bankability. You're not going to see financing if either insurance isn't available, it's unaffordable, or it has so many carve-outs that you really have no assurance there. But it can't all be on the shoulders of insurance. This is why integrating more innovative designs in mitigating and looking at not just historical climate risks, but also projections, absolutely vital. And the fact is, these insurers from AXA, Swiss Re, and others are in fact developing their own models of climate risk assessments and they're doing that to integrate it into how they're providing insurance and look at loss and liability as well. So really important aspects, I think, there for us to be aware of and to build into thinking about how we look at project development as well. There's much more I can say on that, but I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I know we have some of our country teams also on the line. I wonder if anybody wants to unmute themselves and pose their question. I think we have one question. What mechanisms are we using for data sharing? Our IRF investment engine is working to collate, collaborate, and aggregate relevant market data, but there is a gap here, and I wonder what mechanisms are being used or that we can help bring in. This is a question from an organization called IRF Investment Engine, from Yacinda. I think in terms of the data sharing, I think that's, yeah.
I think this is where the AI can play an incredible role. I mean, I was just sharing with Guli, we designed a potential resilience bond, thematic resilience bond. And the first stage is desk research with country level analytics. I usually hire somebody for 30 days to do that, very senior person. And in 3 hours with very advanced analytics of the sort that Giselle was mentioning, that's proprietary, I was able to get the information. Then we get into the room, and it was very nuanced. It even mapped out the political economy of the potential and all those things. So we really need to think about, because this is happening in the private sector. And what you just mentioned, you have the insurers as allies, but then you have hedge fund managers trying to short things based on, the similar kinds of data and all the things. So we really need to have a way that government officials can sit in their offices, ask questions, and be able to draw upon all these various pools of information. And I think the AI analytic tools are the way to go. Thank you.
Happy to add there as well. Look, again, all of these partners that are sitting at the table are helping to put out information, data out there, really critical. And I can spotlight a bit of the World Bank Group work. We have, for example, climate risk assessments, CCKP sites. We've developed country climate development reports, CCDR. Sorry, I'm going to enter our acronym world. And so we're putting more and more tools that are publicly available. In fact, I also worked as part of the World Bank Group team that developed the PPP Climate Toolkit, which is a publication that's also available. So a number of things that are coming out to build capacity to provide data that can be used in looking at structuring assets, structuring projects, used by governments in policy and strategic engagement around Paris Agreement, NDCs, and other aspects. And there's many more tools out there as well. So it's really navigating that, expanding use. I love the AI and bringing that in to kind of help that analysis is really also an interesting aspect of future development as well.
Thank you. We have another question, I think also a hand in the audience, but I'll go to the question in the chat. What has your experience been in engaging private finance for SIDS in particular, small island developing states, and have you faced challenges with economies of scale? Happy to also bring you, Andrew, into the conversation.
Sure, Guli. So, yes, it's a tough one. Economies of scale are really difficult, not only in the island itself, but also across the islands. So we've done some work both in the Pacific Islands as well as the Caribbean. And it is much, much more difficult because of those two issues. I think the solution, part of the solution actually lies in not actually over-raising. I think one's got to actually dimension the initiative such that it's actually an appropriate size for the purpose, which is a bit of a challenge for financial institutions and funds who all aspire to do things at scale and want big flow, big impact, big brush strokes, and those are quite difficult to achieve in Ireland. So one's got to sort of temper those natural inclinations that exist within financial institutions and actually come up with a intervention and a product that can actually work at a level that is actually as functionally effective. They do, as a result of that, tend to be more expensive. So the cost of capital is higher, which then makes it more of a challenge from affordability. Blended finance has a role to play with that. I mentioned earlier on that the primary role of blended finance is de-risking, but it also does have a role of introducing concessional capital to reduce the overall cost of capital in a structured and managed basis. So we're starting to see these type of things come through. The biggest challenge, as we all know, for everything is time. We need to have done these things yesterday.
It would be helpful also to hear from you, Gillian, on this question with the GCF's focus on LDCs and SIDS. And you often hear this question about, how the private sector engagement work in those economies will take a different shape and form than, let's say, in a major emerging economy. So it would be helpful to hear from GCF's perspective on this and approach.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I think it's very interesting and in question about how we work. I'm fully aligned with Andrew. Also, we have to build something specific, and I think also applying also regular models and so on to SIDS in this case also. But you mentioned LDC, it's a bit the case. But for SIDS, we have to in a way to design bespoke structures and so on, and to work. And the other thing also that I would like to emphasize is also working with people with a specific experience of this context. I think it's absolutely key, or at least also trying to partner or to create some partnership with also people with this experience also of this context. That means also that for us, when we do that, also we are willing also to mobilize maybe more, de-risking capital, or Andrew mentioned also blended finance as a solution, and this enabler also for private capital. In this case, I think we need also to utilize also another lens in a way also to attract also more capital. That's why in this case, we use, and when we assess also a project, also for SIDS, particularly, our also assessment is a bit specific. It's a bit specific with also a specific also approach, and that means, for example, that we are able to mobilize more, concessional capital, de-risking, and so on. Because we know that this economy of scale, and the question is very relevant also, is absolutely challenging. So I think partnership and type of capital that we can mobilize also are the key answers.
Thank you. I don't see any hands in the audience, but if anyone has any questions, we have time for one more, so please feel free to speak up. If not, we're right on time actually to finish our Q&A segment. So I will turn back to Pablo to take us on the ways forward and to wrap this up. Thank you. Pablo, over to you.
Thank you, Guli, and thank you everyone in the audience for your very interesting questions, and for our panelists to engage in this conversation. I think that there's a lot to say about what we discussed today, but I think that I'll share a few ideas, a few thoughts in terms of what has been discussed. I think we started the conversation by highlighting how we're already seeing private sector being very relevant in the new round of NDCs. Most of the NDCs that have been submitted to date include the importance of a critical role for private sector to engage in implementation. And we know that the private sector has been engaged in the preparation of these NDCs. So we've heard the importance of NDCs in terms of sending a clear message in terms of the direction of travel of the government, not just in terms of climate, but in terms of development, bringing the climate rationale that will give legitimacy to investments, something that is very critical, as Andrew was mentioning, to drive private sector engagement. But we heard from all of you about what is needed to bridge that gap between where countries are and the private sector is, those enablers. And that starts with a critical understanding of how to turn NDCs into investment plans through programmatic approaches. For example, the capacity that is needed within governments, within private sector, including SMEs, to drive this forward, the different vehicles to de-risk, to blend, to ensure the investments so that we can mobilize private sector by leveraging the public sector resources, the importance of developing projects that are well structured, that are bankable, that can be done in an effective way through support like the GCF support and PPFs, but also building PPFs at the national level through national development banks, for example. The critical element of policy, of legal frameworks, of institutional frameworks in driving this forward, including elements like carbon markets and institutional arrangements. The role of technology, not just in terms of technology to transform the energy sector or the transport sector, but elements like AI to drive better data management, information management, and to accelerate processes and to build capacity on the ground. And the need for a whole of government approach, the role of ministries of finance, of sectoral ministries in driving this forward, the leadership from the top, from the head of state in sending a clear message about what all of this is. And all of these enablers will bring the private sector, and will bring them through vehicles like climate smart PPPs, or a hot topic today, which are the country platforms that are basically bringing together that policy side plus the investment side into a programmatic approach by a government to accelerate investment and implementation of actions on the ground. All of this is critical, but all of this requires collaboration. It requires a lot of technical assistance for developing countries to build up these enablers. It requires the clear conversation between the private and public sectors, actors, to facilitate, to broker that relationship. And it requires all types of stakeholders, like the ones that we have in this great conversation. So I want to thank you, Julien, Giselle, Saba, and Andrew for their incredible contributions. Thank you, Guli and the NDC Partnership Support Unit team for putting this together, and all of those who have been part of this conversation, sharing your thoughts, your knowledge, and your questions for this panel. It has been very productive. It has very, very interesting, and we will continue to engage private sector actors to try to understand what is the best way to engage. We will continue to work closely with developing countries to provide the support, and we will make sure that we're bringing the IFC, the GCF, the UNDP, and the private sector actors to the table to continue these conversations to strengthen this collaboration. So once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for this great conversation. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye, everyone.